So I turned this morning to the book of Daniel because I had read an article claiming, surprise, surprise, that Belshazzar, the king in chapter 5, who was the subject of contention because the scholars said, well, he wasn't the king at all. And it had been discovered and documents had been found in which it was seen that he was indeed the last king before his kingdom was taken or given to Darius, his successor, and his kingdom was removed on the night of the writing on the wall. The writing, the hidden hand. The king could not understand it. He called the Chaldeans, he called the astrologers, the witches, all those clever people. They couldn't fathom it. And then the queen remembered Belteshazzar, Daniel, and his ability to interpret dreams. And was he able to interpret a writing? And the king promised him great treasures and great honor to whomever would interpret the writings. And Daniel typically declined any reward for his work. And in this moment, he became a translator. And I've always thought of a translator as somebody who translates a written text rather than an interpreter who translates spoken words. But translation and, I suppose, interpretation is more the biblical skill, if you could call it a skill, that is required to understand the will of God in any given moment and the judgments and all these things. A prophet is an interpreter. He didn't think of the ideas of his own volition, but he interpreted the signs. He interpreted, perhaps he was given words. And understanding came into his mind, and he shared it. And so it was in the olden days. They had defiled the heritage of the temple by drinking wine from the golden cups. And the kingdom was wrested from him, and he was killed that night. That wicked king. And it made me think about my own life as a translator. And thinking back upon it, I was taught by a very skilled translator with whom I am still in contact. He is some years older than I am, I'm not sure how many. And he is the son of an Anglican vicar. And he knew the Bible, knows the Bible, and although I wasn't a follower of the one true God when I was working alongside of him, since then we've had a couple of conversations, and it's become clear to me that he's locked into what's sometimes called churchianity, perhaps, but I don't think he attends a church. He enjoys the ritual and so on and so forth, but he's not what I would call a born-again believer. And in his translation career, he was led into penury because his insistence on accuracy was at the expense of his income. And that's a commendable thing, of course, and I saw it and I admired it. But I also saw, as we are living men and women, his vanity and the pointlessness of some of his efforts, where he managed to upset translation agency, customer, and the world at large because he knew better. Sometimes he did. Maybe he always did. But we have to live in the world. And penury isn't a good result. I'm sure the Lord doesn't want us poor. He wants us to be well sustained and secure. So he was my main teacher. And then through my career, I met several other translators who I understood had the skills needed to do the job. I was very blessed in my career. I had an ability to, or I have an ability to discern the philosophical underpinnings of a text and then to translate it in accordance with them. And that technique has served me very well. And I'm reputed to be a reliable translator by many agencies. So I rarely lack work in my life. I've generally had to turn it down. Very occasionally has it been missing. And it's actually thankful when it is these days, because I find it hard to turn it down. It seems foolish. And yet I need some free time to get on with other bits and pieces. So the first translator that I met, and the translator that I can still consider to be my sort of spiritual heir, was a man who a fair few years younger than am I. I don't know whether it's 20, but it might be a little less, but certainly a younger man. And he had an interest in philosophy, although he didn't study philosophy, but from conversations with him, it was very clear that he discerned the philosophical underpinnings of the world to some measure. And I had some very interesting conversations with him and learned a few things from him, of course, as we must. I never see it as being a one-way process, teaching, if that's what it is. I was to teach him, as it turned out. I was given the particular task of teaching him. And I don't know whether I taught him anything of any use, but he went on to become a very successful translator and a very good writer. I've read many of his translations, and they're typically excellent. And we're still in contact. Now his life was, I would say, intercepted by a very beautiful woman. He himself is a very handsome man, I would say, and so as perhaps the most handsome translator in the agency, and it was a big agency with probably a couple of hundred people in the staff, or certainly the resources, which is us translators. And so he married the most beautiful woman in the office and has had 2 children with her, 2 boys. But unfortunately, because of the condition of men and women at the moment and the condition of marriage, he has been brought into bondage through that marriage. And he may need to extricate himself at some point, or perhaps he will be jettisoned. Who can truly say? But I think there will be trouble on the horizon, as much as I can discern such things. The woman is dangerous. This is what I've come to understand. And until they've been brought into submission, they must be treated with the utmost caution. Another translator who I didn't teach and who is a very good interpreter of things and an excellent writer was again thwarted, I would say, by women. He was almost married to a young lady that really behaved quite as a harlot and brought great shame upon him. And then he became unwittingly one of the first passport bros, and he married a Thai woman and lives with her, as far as I know, in Thailand, in, I think, a small village away from the tourist areas, and presumably in great isolation, but I'm not sure about that. Perhaps he has other colleagues. We're not regularly in touch, but we are certainly cordial. I like to keep cordial relations with everybody. And then there arrived another very good translator in the company. And he had been seduced by money. He had managed to sell his interpretation, translation skills as a branded product almost. And so he became a key person for certain companies. He was able to get highly paid translation work, and to all intents and purposes, is a very successful translator. But the love of money, as we do know, is the root of all evil. And I've had the opportunity to work with this man and to increase my earnings, but I found I could not. Although he's very highly considered, personally, I've never liked the way that he writes. And when it came my turn to work with him, and so he wanted me to write in the same manner, I found I could not. I tried and I was unable. So I desisted. This is the way of things. People get led astray into different territories. Another very good translator came along, a man who I could perhaps have taught a little bit, and perhaps I did, but in terms of writing skill, he was really very good indeed, very creative, very inventive. He came from quite a high-placed family, I think, although he was the bastard son of that family, and it rankled. And his career progressed very well, but he became embroiled in the tavern and the drink. as a mature man. He was drawn to those things, and nihilism, I suppose, and unresolved, perhaps this unresolved issue with his father. I don't know precisely what happened, and nor do I know whether it continues to happen, but I think I do. I have had some confirmation. I'm not implying that the man is a drunkard or anything, but one gets drawn into different side roads. This is the problem. Whether they be families or women or money or drink, none of them are the roads that lead where you need to go ultimately, although there might be roads that you could travel upon temporarily. It's a good idea to get to know what they are, to weigh the substance of them. So I suppose I do see my career as being indicative of some measure of understanding, and I've applied the same principles gradually as I started to read the Bible. And the Bible has been just opened in so many different ways to me, because I approach it from that angle, you know. I'm trying to fathom out the words that are written in it. That's why one of the reasons I'm so insistent on using the authorized version, which I consider to be spiritually endowed with power. Although latterly I've come to understand that there is a matter of lexical abilities, because I have to remember that because of my career and not because of my cleverness, I do have higher literacy than average, higher than average literacy. And so, and I find the Bible difficult, so people with low levels of literacy may find it too difficult. And so I began to realize that these simplified Bibles from the 1900s have a role to play, perhaps even more recent ones. They have a role to play because they can bring scripture to people for whom the old English is just too difficult. And I know a few people like that. They don't have that literary ability or familiarity, and the language would dissuade them. So they have a role to play, as long as it's remembered, and it must be remembered always, that they are inferior copies, and any doubt or any question that comes or any apparent inconsistency must be resolved by referring to the authorized version to see what it really says, and to find the missing verses also. This is something that I mean, really, it surprises me that people have such brass necks that they would do such a thing as to remove a verse from the Bible. Such are my thoughts this morning. I'm busy cleaning the house, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day and that I'm audible at last. God bless.